Is my nose all shiny? What's going on? I should powder my nose. But if I ever start putting on makeup for YouTube videos, I've gone off the deep end. CGQ Plus. All right. Make that closer. Welcome back to another episode of Flashback here on CGQ Plus. We're going to kind of go out of order again today. Last time on Flashback, we talked about Radio Shack. This time, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Radio Shack and then also use that as a springboard to talk about the Atari Lynx. And you'll see why as I tell the story. First, we're going to do mail real quick. I did get several packages, but I'm going to wait and show those during the Flashback Christmas special, if you want to call it that, which I'm planning on making and uploading probably the weekend before Christmas. So that won't be for about 3 weeks. So we just got 3 postcards here today, so we'll just go through them quickly. This first one is from Dan in, on Long Island, New York, we'll just say. And I asked Dan this when I sent him back a postcard. I don't really know what the story is. This thing's called the Big Duck, but you can see that it's a duck with a door in the front, so it's like a building-sized duck. So that's pretty cool, and he put a Christmas stamp on it, and that's pretty neat. Thank you very much, Dan. Oh, by the way, all 3 of these postcards have been replied to, so if you don't get your postcard in some reasonable amount of time, let me know. The next one comes from somebody who gave me their address so I could reply to the postcard, but didn't give me a name, so I don't know who to say thank you to specifically, but he's in Port Canaveral, Florida. Whenever I think of, Canaveral, Florida, I think of Cape Canaveral, Florida, and, where they launched the spaceships and rockets and whatnot from. But apparently, it's got a port on it where they, that's like a jumping off point for cruise ships. And it's pretty crazy to look at that because, look at how close those ships are to the land. And, I mean, obviously they dredge out the water or whatever but you would think a cruise ship would need some really deep water. And those aren't just up against just piers. I mean, that's land. And you can even see some like sand and whatnot underneath the surface of the water. I don't know how that works, but that's a really cool postcard. I've only been on one cruise in my life, and I'm not saying that it wasn't fun, but it didn't make me want to go on another one, if that makes sense. Like, it was me and my wife and a couple of other younger couples, and then just like a ton of cotton tops. Last postcard we have here, I believe, someone correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have another new country to check off the list. This is from Thailand, not to be confused with Taiwan, because we have gotten some postcards from William over in Taiwan. I'm probably not going to say your name right, Pla, P-L-A. But anyway, he sent us this postcard from Thailand, and it looks pretty cool. I've never been to Southeast Asia, but I'd like to go. It seems very beautiful there. But this is from Chiang Mai, I guess, is the city in Thailand. So that's pretty cool. So thank you very much for Pla again. Hopefully that's saying your name right. Sometimes with these international postcards, I will look up the address on Google just to make sure I'm formatting it correctly. And I couldn't find that address on Google Maps. So I hope that when I addressed your postcard, I did it correctly. And if I didn't and you don't get it, please just let me know. And speaking of postcards, somebody left a comment in, I don't remember which recent video. It might have been a live stream or it might have been the last Flashback. And the guy was saying, like, he can't find a cool postcard or wishes he had a cool postcard. And, like, somebody else already sent a postcard from that city. Like, that doesn't matter. Like, just, you can send anything. It doesn't even really have to be a postcard. Like, go get an index card and just write on it. It can be anything. This is not like a contest to see who can send the coolest postcard. So don't overthink it. Anyway, so I just got a few more little tidbits to talk about with Radio Shack. And then we're going to get to the Atari Lynx. So when I first started working at Radio Shack, I mentioned in the last episode that I met this guy in an online chat room, and he was the manager of Radio Shack, and he told me he'd hook me up with a job. And, so I went through the whole rigmarole I talked about last time, and then I end up getting the job, right? And so I start working for this guy, and this guy must have only been, like, literally a few years older than me. Like, I was 18. I'm thinking he was like 21, 22, 23 at the most. And but he looked even younger than that. It was funny, like he he was obviously the store manager, so he wanted to dress up nice, so he would wear like a proper suit to work every day. And this was the mid 90s, so the fashion back then as far as like suits go were to have, I mean, I'm sure you guys who are old enough remember, they were like baggy suits, and they were the double-breasted suits, so they had like the row of buttons going down the chest there. And that's what was just in style. Like now the style is more like slim fit, like 50s and 60s style suits with like simple skinny ties that are a solid color. But back then that's not what it was. And so he would wear that kind of suit to work every day. And he was this really, really skinny guy. And so he just looked like a kid who was like trying to wear his dad's suit. Like if you remember the very last scene in the movie Big with Tom Hanks, where he gets dropped off on his home street and he's walking home, and then that's when he turns back into a kid, but he's still wearing the adult suit. Like, that's what this guy looked like. Alan, that was the guy's name, Alan. And I remember, like, it didn't strike me, like, now looking back on it, I realize how bizarre it really was, but at the time, it was just kind of like, all right. So Alan was, like I said, in his early 20s, but he was married, but his wife was 15. Like, they came from some other state. They moved out from there, and it was one of these situations where, like, she had to get her parents' permission. Like, they had to sign a permission slip for them to get married. Because, like I said, she was 15. And being 15, like, she had nothing to do, like, during the day. Like, I don't think she was in school. Like, I think she dropped out of high school because, well, she was married. Because really, even though they were married, like, she could have still gone to school and gotten a diploma, but she didn't. So, but being 15, like, without like a work permit or whatever, like, she couldn't get a job. So she used to come to work with him all the time. Like, whenever he would even come to work, she would just kind of sit in the back room doing, I don't know what, coloring or something. That's mean, but she would just kind of sit there and do whatever. And it was really bizarre, but then he would hardly ever come to work anyway. Like this was like a new Radio Shack that got put into this shopping center where you wouldn't really expect a Radio Shack to be. Like, it was in a part of town where, like, contractors would go shopping. Like, if you needed to go to like a tile and flooring store, that's where it would be. Like, not a bad part of town, but I'm just saying almost a little more like industrial retail area. And there wasn't really a lot of housing around that area. So why would there be a Radio Shack? So we got very, very little business. And so he would just hardly ever even come to work because I was there. And, if you're like the manager of a retail store, especially back then, you were pretty much unsupervised, right? Like, there was a district manager, but he was based like 3 hours away. So, like, you never had to worry about this guy, the district manager, Rick. He was a real piece of work. You never had to worry about him like popping in. Like, that wasn't going to happen. So Alan would just hardly ever come to work. And so, like, I would be at work by myself a lot. And so I would just kind of sit in the store and just watch the store, and every once in a while somebody would come in. But like I said, it was in this really weird little strip mall. It was a tiny strip mall. It maybe had like 5 storefronts, and like 3 of them were empty. I would just sit there, and like I would bring like a cup of noodles for lunch every day, and because we had like a microwave in the back, and I would just be like bored. And the only thing I remember about that was, like, I never knew what a scanner was, right? Because back then, like, a PC scanner, I mean, they existed, but I don't think I even knew what one was. Although Stuart, my friend Stuart, had a little handheld scanner, which I actually still have. But anyway, this talking about like a radio scanner. And so, like, Alan showed me these radio scanners because, like, we didn't have a TV in the store. Like, we had TVs, but they weren't hooked up. And I don't think you could really turn the radio on. But so I would sit there and play with the scanner and like listen into the police or whatever. And some of you guys may or may not remember this or realize this, but back then, cellular phone frequencies, they were on like a different, range of frequencies than they are now. And if you had a 900 megahertz scanner, you could kind of listen into people's phone calls on cell phones back then. Now, mind you, this was 1995 when cell phones were, it was much, much more uncommon for someone to have a cell phone. So, you might not even get anybody on the thing, but, you'd sit there and turn it and, be some guy telling his wife he's going to bring home dinner or whatever, and I used to just sit there and listen to that. And like the only real memory I have of working in that particular store was this guy comes in there one time and he wants to buy a car phone antenna. Like if you guys remember, you could always tell what car had a car phone because they all had the same antenna that was stuck to the back window, and it was about this long, and it had like a little pigtail squiggle in the middle and then a tiny ball on the end. And he wanted to buy one of those. And I said, okay, what kind of car phone do you have? Because I think maybe there was like different connections. Like you had to buy a different one depending on what car phone system you had. And he kind of got weird. He was like, oh. And I was like, well, I just need you to tell me, which one. He's like, oh, just tell me one, whatever. I'm like, well, I have to know which kind of phone you have. And then he kind of fessed up that he didn't have a car phone. He just wanted the antenna to stick on his car so it would look like he had a car phone. And I was like, I think we've all been there, when you're a young guy and you're a little more insecure and you're trying to like kind of show off. But at the same time, I was kind of like, that's kind of sad. But I don't remember if he ended up buying the antenna or not. But that's like one of the only things that sticks out to me about working at that particular store. Because I only worked there for about 2 months. Because then what happened was a new store was opening closer to my house in kind of a nicer area. And they needed help setting up the store, right? Like they were being shipped all these boxes of stuff. Like somebody had come in there already and just put up the walls and put up like it wasn't pegboard, but whatever the stuff was that you would put sort of on the walls that you could hang the like little pegs on where you would put the products. Like that was all there, but that's it. Like there were not any pegs put up. There wasn't any product out. That was all just shipped in boxes. And then there was like a store setup manual that would say, okay, this panel should have this many pegs on this row and this many pegs on this row. And then you put these exact products on each peg. And so that way, like there was a certain amount of conformity like between stores. But basically what that meant is that you could go work at this store. You didn't have to dress up. You didn't have to deal with customers, which was the most important part. And so it was easier work. Now, the flip side of that was that you didn't get any commission. But Radio Shack paid something like 1% commission on regular sales. Like if you sold something on clearance or you sold an extended warranty, you made more money. And I think I may have mentioned that last time. But like for a general sale, like if somebody comes in and buys a pack of batteries for $5, you got 1% commission on that, which is a nickel. And the store I was working at, like I just said, I wasn't selling anything anyway, so I wasn't really making any commission. So you would get like some of these salespeople that worked at like a mall location or something where they were making decent commission. There's no way they were going to want to go set up some other store because they were going to lose money. But for me, it was just like, yeah, great. At first, I liked the manager. Like the manager, again, he was this guy in like his early 20s. He had just gotten out of the Navy, but he kind of had like this alpha personality and kind of thought he was the cock of the walk or something. Like looking back on it, the guy was kind of an a-hole. But when I first started working there, I liked him better than Alan because Alan was kind of a creepy pedophile, let's be honest. And then there was another salesman there. Well, I mentioned Paul and Dwayne, the brothers, last time. So Paul was there. So that's how I met Paul. And then the other guy was this guy, Russ. And Russ must have been in like his 30s. And Russ was one of these guys who was just going to be like a lifelong like career salesman. And Russ and I did not get along at all because like, I was fresh out of high school. I didn't know anything about anything. And I just got on his nerves because he felt like I wasn't respecting like the proper etiquette of sales. Like I remember like one time I was out on the sales floor and somebody comes in the store and says, yeah, I called earlier. I'm looking for a TV. And I said, oh, yeah, I'll show you where the TVs are, and I went and I showed him the TVs, and I was talking to him about, like, oh, this is the 27-inch, and that's the 21-inch, and this one has 2 inputs, and that one has 1, or whatever, And then, like, Russ comes out of the back room, and he's like, Chris, I've got this. I'm helping this customer. I'm like, oh, no, it's okay. I'm already helping them. He's like, no. He made kind of a little bit of a scene, like, enough that the customer noticed, like, and I was just like, oh, okay. And I just went in the back room, because to me, it's just like, I don't know what that was all about, but, like, whatever. And he ends up not selling the guy a TV. I think he kind of creeped the guy out the way he was acting. The guy ends up leaving, and then like Russ comes in the back room and just starts chewing me out about how, when a customer walks in the store and they say they called already, you asked who they talked. Because like to Russ, I was trying to steal his commission, which was totally not true. Like, I was completely oblivious. Like, I'm just trying to help the customer and like do my job. But, again, Russ is like this career sales guy who, I was making $4.25 or $4.50 an hour. And like, yeah, Russ had been in sales longer, but it's not like Radio Shack was like handing out pay raises for just the normal sales guys. So, I mean, this guy was probably living off of like whatever commission he was making, because he was the kind of guy, like, he knew how to be a salesman and try to get people to buy stuff. Like, I've always been like, when I was doing that kind of stuff, I was just trying to help the customer. A customer would walk in, yeah, I want like a tabletop radio. Okay, here's A, B, and C. This is what they cost. Here's the features they have. That's it. Like, I was not like the kind of guy that was like, hey, what can I do to put you in a radio today? Like, I wasn't like the Glengarry Glen Ross. Like, they wouldn't come in the store unless they were looking to buy. I didn't care. Like, I was just trying to be a helpful person. Ultimately, that's why I left that store, is the manager basically wanted to get rid of me because, Russ was helping generate sales, and that makes the manager look better, and it probably puts money in the manager's pocket. And I really wasn't. Like, I was not a good salesman. Like, you would get the sales report like every 2 weeks or something that would show like how much each store had sold. And then even it would show each employee, like, here was your total sales for the month or whatever. And like, Paul and I were usually at the bottom, because Paul was the same way. Like, he was just like, customer comes in, you're just trying to be customer oriented. And like, we felt like we were trying to do a good job, but really to the higher ups, we weren't doing a good job because we weren't making sales. Right. But the one other thing I remember, like, Paul was a real funny guy, like a naturally funny person. And he would, he could do like voices and stuff. And we used to sell like CBs and two-way radios, obviously at Radio Shack. And so we would sit there and mess around with those. And at some point we figured out that with one of those radios, we could listen in to the drive-through intercom, or whatever you want to call it, of the Long John Silver's across the street. And it was never super clear to us. This was not on a scanner. It was on a radio, because like Paul would key in and try to like augment people's orders, or he would try to place orders. And I don't remember if it ever was really that successful. I don't know if they could actually hear us or if we could only hear them. But I just remember, like, when you're working in retail and you're bored, like something like that might normally not be that funny just becomes like hilarious because it like breaks the monotony. I think Dwayne was like splitting his time between two stores. And, so Dwayne was working sometimes at the store I was working at, and sometimes he was working at this other store. And at some point, I ended up getting transferred to Dwayne's other store. And again, I think that's just because I think the manager kind of wanted to get rid of me because I wasn't selling well. And it was, Russ and I were really, really not getting along, and it was kind of causing problems, I think, for him. So I ended up going to this other store, and like the stories I told last time about like the electric guitar and whatnot, that was over at this other store. And so that's where Dwayne was working. And so then I started working over there, and then somebody else ended up leaving. Like, somebody else worked there who was like a college student, and they left. And so then we got Paul to come over there and work there full time. And so that's why I was saying I worked with Paul and Dwayne. So it was the two brothers and me, is because we ended up getting Paul to come over there with us, sort of full time or whatever. And that's when the job kind of got a little bit better. And one of the things, I obviously edited down that last video quite a bit. And I felt like in the final edit, I really made it seem like Dwayne was like this pothead, like loser or lazy guy. And that really wasn't the case at all. It was just like on Sundays, we had nothing to do and we would just kind of screw around, but Dwayne was a hard worker. But the main thing I remember about Dwayne that I'm kind of thankful for, I was fresh out of high school, right? And I was kind of 18 going on 15, like, if that makes sense. I mentioned, in like the first or second episode that my dad passed away when I was like 14. And then I was just living with my mom. And then like we moved in with my grandmother. And so I didn't really have any kind of male role model in my life. And my mom had her boyfriend who's now her husband, but like, I don't know, he just really wasn't around too much. He's a really good guy, very much so. But at the same time, he's not someone I look back on as really being a male role model for me. So I really kind of didn't have one. And the older I've gotten and the more like sort of wisdom and perspective I've gotten looking back on the past, it really made me realize how important it is for boys and young men to have proper male role models to show them and sort of demonstrate for them how to act like an adult and sort of like how to be a man, and maybe that's not a politically correct thing to say anymore, but it's true. You need to know, like a guy needs to know how to be a man in the world. And I didn't really have that. And so, I graduated high school as somebody who, again, was raised by a mother and a grandmother. I was really kind of a loner in high school, so I didn't really even have too much of a social life. And the people that I did hang out with, for the most part, were the other gaming nerds. And so you didn't really, learn anything about, how to be an adult from them either, no offense. And all of a sudden, I graduate from high school and my mom and my grandma are like, if you think you're going to sit around the house this summer, you've got another thing coming. Like, you're either going to sign up for college or you're going to get a job. And I just, I was like burned out on 13 years of public school. And so I just wanted to get a job instead. And so that's how I ended up with this Radio Shack job. But like like all of a sudden I'm being thrown into the work world, having to work with people who are either a little bit older than me, or in the case of a guy like Russ, way older than me, when I don't really even have the maturity of my age. I'm even, like I said, I really acted like a teenager still. And Dwayne was kind of like the only person who would actually take me aside and like give me little talkings to when I was like acting stupid or just said something that made me look dumb or immature. Like most people as adults, when they see someone acting like that, they're just kind of like, this person's annoying, get him away from me. Like, I'm probably guilty of doing that too, right? You just sort of dismiss the person. And that's kind of probably how I ended up getting sent to that store in the first place. And even Paul, Paul and I got along just fine, but I would never say that Paul and I were friends, because I think him and his friends, like I mentioned, Paul's friends weren't that nice to me, but I was kind of annoying to them when they came to visit, because I acted like an immature kid, But Dwayne would actually kind of tell me, he's like, hey, you're, when you say stuff like that or do stuff like that, you just, whatever. He would just sort of like give me a little tips or whatever of how to just stop acting like a knucklehead or whatever. And I always really appreciated that, even though I only worked with Dwayne for a few months, but he's somebody who like, Dwayne's voice ends up in my head still to this day on a regular basis. And after I made the last episode, I actually looked Dwayne up on the internet and found him and traded emails with him. And he actually isn't that far away from me, so I might actually go visit Dwayne. But I kind of wanted to say that. I mean, Dwayne doesn't watch my show, but I don't know. For whatever reason, even though Dwayne is just some random person to you guys, I just felt like, I didn't want to make it seem like Dwayne was a loser. He actually, after we all kind of ended up leaving Radio Shack pretty close to each other. I think I left first. Paul ended up going and working at a grocery store right near my house. I know Dwayne ended up like at a liquor store, but Dwayne actually ended up joining the military, and I think he actually got shipped overseas, and now he's a cop. So certainly Dwayne didn't turn out how you might expect based on what I said about him last time. So you might be thinking, what does this all have to do with the Atari Lynx? And it has a couple of things to do. So when I was working at the second store, when I met Paul, at some point we were talking about video games, and I don't really remember the details of the conversation, just to be honest. But he mentioned that he had this Atari Lynx, and I think he just didn't want it anymore or something. And I told him I would buy it off of. I don't remember if he said I'm selling an Atari Lynx or if he just said he had one he didn't want, and I offered to buy it off of him. But that's what ended up happening. He brought in his Lynx like the next day, and I paid him, what I don't remember what I paid him. It wasn't cheap. I want to say it might have been like $100 or $150. This was in 1995, so the Lynx hadn't quite been discontinued yet. Now, it came out in like September of '89, so it was certainly, at the end of its lifespan. But 6 years in video game terms, like at this time in 1995, I can't think of what handheld system was out that was better. The Game Boy Color was still, I think, 3 years away from coming out. You had the Lynx and you had the Game Gear, the Turbo Express, but I mean, that was kind of gone by then. And maybe I'm missing something obvious, but I don't remember. And so I knew what the Lynx was by then. I was like, well, that sounds kind of cool. And so he brought it in, and I bought it from him, and I got a few games. And at the time when I got it, it came in a smaller case that I still have, but I don't have it here. Because I've had to upgrade to a bigger case. And so I just figured we're just going to go through, I'll show the links and talk about it. and just talk about all the games. So this is the case that I have now. I believe there were two official Lynx cases. There was the smaller one that was more like a sleeve that had some pockets on the outside for a few games, and that's what I had. And then I just recently got this case. I think I bought it from Best Electronics. There's one or two websites where you can still buy a lot of Atari stuff, and I believe Best Electronics was where I got this. They still sell like brand new Lynx games and accessories. They still sell brand new Atari Jaguar games and accessories. At least up until recently, you could still buy a brand new Jaguar or a Jag CD from them. I think they're finally sold out. But like, I got this case, I think it was $25, and it was still brand new in the package, which is probably what it cost back then. So I didn't think that was a bad deal at all. But I just have so many games now that the system wouldn't fit in the old case anymore. So let me just get it out here real quick. So this is still the system that I bought from Paul, and that's the Lynx 2, as it's known. This is what Atari actually called this system, but it's also just sort of what it's colloquially known as. The first Lynx was bigger. It didn't have the rubber grips on the back. It was a little bit of a different shape. Some people really prefer the Model 1 Lynx. I think the Model 2 Lynx definitely looks cooler. I'm not sure I've ever played a Model 1, so I don't know if I can really compare them, but there's nothing about this system that I don't like, so I don't know how the Model 1 would be better. Just a little bit of quick history about the Lynx. I am by no means an expert on the system. This was designed by a couple of guys who were Amiga hardware designers. And one guy's name was Dave Needle. And the other guy's last name was, I think, Micah, and I can't remember his first name. But they were basically hired or commissioned by the video game company Epix. If you guys remember Epix, if you played like 8-bit computer games back in the day, you know Epix. Like, they did the summer games, winter games, California games, along with, I think, Robots of Dawn was like a Epix. They had a lot of games on like the Apple II, the Commodore 64, probably Atari 8-bit computers. I've never had one of those, but anyway, for whatever reason, Epix of all people decided that they wanted to develop a handheld system. And so they hired these two guys to develop the system. It was originally called the Handy. That's not a good name. And then at some point, Epix got bought out by Atari Corporation. So that was when Atari was being led by, what was it, Jack Tramiel? Hope I didn't just say that. No, it was Jack Tramiel. They bought out Epix, and then Epix kind of went out of business somehow. I don't understand how it all worked, but like Atari got stuck with the Lynx because Epix was gone. And which was ironic because Amigas were the development stations that you used to make Lynx games. And of course, Commodore was like the arch enemy of the Atari Corporation because they had competing 8-bit computer systems. So like the Atari people had to use the competitor's computer to develop Lynx games. So if you've never seen a Lynx, I mean, I can show it to you really quick here, but some cool features that it has. It's got 2 action buttons, but they're here and here. So you can have your grip however you want it. And then you just got like a normal D-pad over here. The power buttons, the on and off buttons are like these soft just buttons. It's not a switch. So that's a little bit bizarre, but it works. And then down here, this is something that the Lynx 1 didn't have. You can turn the backlight off. So like if you're going to pause the game and walk away for a few minutes, you could turn off the backlight to save power. Because on these old systems, handheld systems, the biggest drain on the battery was the bulb that was used to light the screen. Like, so the same thing. The Lynx had a better battery life than the Sega Game Gear, but neither of them was really very good. So to be able to turn that off was cool. You had 2 option buttons over here that could be 2 additional action buttons depending on the game. And then you had a pause button in the middle. And then you probably can't read this, but if you push these 2 buttons together, oh, can you read that? If you push these 2 buttons together, it would reset the system. But if you push these 2 buttons together, it would flip the image on the screen so that if you were left-handed and you wanted to, you could play the game with the D-pad on the right. I don't know anybody who actually did that, but I'm sure somebody out there maybe will chime in who's a lefty that did that. And then on the top here, you have volume control. I'm probably doing this backwards. Yeah, it's over here. Volume control, headphone jack, Comlinks cable, because you could daisy chain. The hardware limited you to daisy chaining 16 link systems together, but I don't think a game ever came out that supported more than 8. It's got a power jack, because you can plug in an AC adapter, which is how I play it, and then it has a contrast knob or adjustment wheel or whatever, so that you can basically make the screen brighter or darker based on whatever conditions you're in. The cartridge slot is right here on the back. And then it actually has these 2 hooks on the back, because you could get a strap for it to have it around your neck. I don't have one of those. It doesn't really seem very necessary. I've never, much like the Game Boy, I've never played a multiplayer Lynx game, which is too bad. Then we get into like the games. First of all, I'll just show this just in case anybody, if you have a Lynx and you didn't know about this. Well, one thing I should mention first, actually, about the hardware. The screen on this is no different than the screen on like a Game Gear or a Turbo Express. It's not good. No handheld had a good screen back then. Even the Game Boy, it had a lot of motion blur. It was that spinach green. These were better because they were in color and in this case backlit. But it's still not great. Now there's a mod kit you can buy from this guy who calls himself McWill, like MCWILL, where you put like a modern LCD screen in here that looks really, really good. And you actually add a VGA output to the system. And I wouldn't mind getting that, except that I don't want to modify. Like, this is my original Lynx and I want to keep it stock. And what sucks is that a few years ago, I found a Lynx at a yard sale just down the street. And, but I didn't know about that mod. So I ended up just like selling. The Lynx came with a couple games that I wanted. And then I just sold the Lynx, I think, on the Atari Age forums or whatever. But if I had known about that mod, I would have kept the Lynx and modded it. But certainly, if you get the Lynx modded with the screen, and then you buy one of these, which is the Lynx SD, which is literally, it's like an EverDrive for the Lynx. It's just made by this company Retro HQ, which I want to say they're British, but I'm not positive. But it works the exact same way. It takes a micro SD card and you turn it on and you turn on the system and there's like a list of games to choose from. It works fine. But if you had one of these and a modified Lynx screen, I mean, that would be the ultimate setup. Now, obviously you can just play Lynx games on something like a RetroPie. So, which is totally fine. But I would say, like, if you don't have much experience with the Lynx, you've never had one, check it out, because, as much as I hate the term hidden gem, I would say the Lynx as a whole is kind of a hidden gem, just because there's so many cool games on it that maybe you haven't played before. So like if you have something like a RetroPie, just put a Lynx simulator on there and get some games and check it out. So even though I do have that Lynx SD, I still do have a bunch of games, and we'll get, when we get to that game, I'll talk about why there's the second Radio Shack connection with the Lynx. The first one here is APB. So a lot of these are Atari arcade game ports, and that APB would be an example of one of them. I'm probably not going to show gameplay footage. I mean, I don't really have a way to record it without using a RetroPie. So APB, this is like a game where you're a cop and you're driving around in your car and you're pulling people over. But the way you drive it, it's almost like driving in like an obstacle course. And you have like this little cursor thing that's in front of you that you use to like put it over whatever you're trying to pull over, and you hit a button to pull over. I don't think this game is that great on the Lynx. I believe in the arcade, you actually had a steering wheel on the cabinet, and that would make it better. It's not a bad game on the Lynx, but I only have it because I got it really cheap. So the next one is hockey. I have 2 sports games for the Lynx. Hockey is definitely not a good game. But what is a good game? Rampage. This is a pretty good port of Rampage. Everything is zoomed in so that because the screen resolution on a Lynx is nothing great, right? So if you tried to have the same field of view, it wouldn't look good at all. But this is more zoomed in, so maybe think like Pac-Man on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, like where everything's more zoomed in, or Super Mario Brothers Deluxe on the Game Boy Color. Same kind of thing. So you can only maybe see like a building and a half in the frame while you're playing. But other than that, I mean, this is a good version of Rampage. Next is another Atari arcade port, Robotron 2084. If you like Robotron, it's a pretty good version of. Now in the arcade, I think was Robotron. It either used 2 sticks or it had a rotating knob. I can't remember which, but obviously you don't have that here. But they made it work, so it's still pretty cool. Next, I've got Joust, so another Atari arcade game port. I've never been the hugest Joust fan personally. I remember Jonathan really liked Joust. And anytime we would go to the movies, like we had a movie theater that was near our neighborhood that we would either ride bikes to or Jonathan's mom would drop us off. So this would have been in like the late 80s. They had a Joust cabinet in the lobby, and he used to always pop a couple quarters into Joust. But like I said, for me personally, you know what I'm guessing? Probably Jonathan had Joust on the Atari 5200. Maybe that's why he fell in love with it. I don't really know. Next here is Dracula the Undead. That's actually like an adventure game, like a point-and-click adventure game. I haven't played it too much, but I mean, I don't really care for it that much. But just the fact that there was a point-and-click adventure game on the Lynx is pretty cool. Next, so there's 2 games that I think if you really wanted to show off the prowess of the Lynx as far as the graphical capabilities that it has. The Lynx was just an 8-bit system. It had a variant of the 6502 processor that the NES has, but the Lynx could do sprite scaling, which is pretty impressive. The first game is Steel Talons, and Steel Talons was like a helicopter, I don't know if you want to say flight simulator, that's kind of stretching it, but it was a fully 3D helicopter combat game. Like think of Desert Strike, but in 3D. Or like what's that game on the PlayStation, Warhawk, something like that, but portable. So it's a reasonably fun game, but just the fact they were able to pull it off on the Lynx at all is very impressive. And then the last game, this is kind of an interesting game, Ishido, Way of the Stones. I mean, it's kind of like a solitaire style game where you're putting little, I guess, stones down on this big. It's hard to explain, but so kind of like a solitaire puzzle type of, maybe something like Othello or Go, except that it's single player. Next, so those were all just in one of the pockets down here, and then the rest of my games are like this thing has like these little pouches that are closed with Velcro. So we'll just open those up, and maybe I'll just take all 4 out at the same time. So these first 3 games, so when I bought my Lynx off of Paul, it came with 3 games. It, of course, came with the maybe Epic's most famous game, California Games, because that was the pack-in with the system. And this is a great pack-in game. This game had it had like what do they call it? It was like hacky sack, but they didn't call it that. They called it footbag. And it had skateboarding. I had downhill BMX, and I think this game had surfing as well. But I probably played this game the most, actually, when I bought this system from Paul. This next one I really didn't get into that much, and I'm kind of sorry I didn't. I think I just really didn't. I'd never played a game like this, and that's Viking Child. Viking Child is like a side-scrolling action RPG, like the latter Wonder Boy, like not the first Wonder Boy game, but like the second or the third. And so it's kind of slow, and you're picking up coins and whatnot. And I just kind of didn't. I'd never played a game like that before, and I just kind of didn't get it. The third game that it came with, this was a great game on the Lynx, was Rygar, and it's a good port of Rygar. Like if you play Rygar on the NES, it's pretty much the same game, but it looks really good. It sounds really good. I didn't really talk about the Lynx's sound. I think if I had to say one thing about the Lynx that was like a standout feature, it had really, really good sound, music and sound effects. And then lastly here in the first row, so I didn't get this game from Paul. In fact, I didn't get this game until a few years later, but this was one of the first things I ever bought off of eBay, and that is Crystal Mines 2. And I don't know what you call this type of game. Maybe like an action puzzle game. I think I've talked about this game before in a magazine read-through, if I remember correctly. It was in like an issue of GamePro or EGM. But Crystal Mines 2 is definitely a cool game. It's got cool music, really good sound effects, and it's just a lot of fun. So yeah, like I said, I'm not saying it was the very first thing I bought off of eBay, but it was one of the first things. And then we get into the second row, and then we're going to talk about the other Radio Shack connection. So somebody brought this up in the comment section on my Radio Shack video, the last flashback video. And I think he said it was called Radio Shack Unlimited. I don't remember. So there was the Radio Shack Shop at Home catalog. Well, it wasn't called that, I guess. But there was the Radio Shack catalog, like the ones that we just went through. And you could order out of those. Most of those products were available in the store, but you could also order them. But then there was also this whole separate catalog that was only in the store. It was like this big display, and it was huge. Like it was many volumes, and it had all kinds of stuff in it. And so you would go in there, you'd see something you'd want, and you would go order it from like the sales guy, and then it would get sent. I think it might have only gotten sent to the store. Maybe you couldn't get it at your house. I could be wrong on that. See, now this is too dim. The sun just went on behind a cloud. So, and I'd be working at the store, and I'd be kind of bored because there wouldn't be any customers. And so I used to go flick through the catalog, just looking through stuff. And wouldn't you know it, they sold Lynx games in the Radio Shack Unlimited catalog. And I thought, well, that's cool, because I don't think I saw Lynx games anymore at the store by then. And so I picked up this game while I was working at Radio Shack, and I probably got an employee discount. And because sort of by like 1995 or 1996, this company Telegames, which still exists, was selling and distributing Lynx games and Jaguar games. And this was a game that I remembered. This is a game that I rented for the Genesis and liked it. And so when I saw that it was available for the Lynx, I grabbed it. And that is Desert Strike, which, so I mentioned that game earlier when I was talking about Warbirds, as being maybe a 3D, version of like, so Desert Strike is like an isometric. I mean, everybody's played right? There was Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, and there was Urban Strike was the other one. And they were all on the Genesis. I don't remember if they came out on the Super Nintendo or not, but then some of them got re-released on the PlayStation, I think, with updated graphics. But anyway, Desert Strike was the original one. And when I got this, I played this one on the Lynx quite a bit when I got it. I really liked it. It's a very good version of the game, in my opinion. And so that's the only thing I ever ordered out of that Radio Shack Unlimited catalog. So for that reason, and because I got the Lynx from Paul, I always think about Radio Shack when I think about the Lynx. Next here, so the other night on the live stream, on the Sega Master System live stream, one of the games that we played was Ninja Gaiden or Ninja Gaiden, whatever. And I mentioned falsely, as the game was loading, I thought that the Master System version was going to more closely resemble the arcade version, because of course the version of Ninja Gaiden that came out on the NES is nothing like the arcade version. It's still a cool game, I guess. It's very hard, but I mean, a lot of people love the Ninja Gaiden series, but in the arcade it was a beat 'em up. And then on the NES, and as it turns out on the Master System, it's just a side-scrolling action game. It's still a cool game. But Ninja Gaiden on the Lynx, this more closely resembles the arcade game, which is a beat 'em up, and is a pretty cool game. So if you want to play a home version of the arcade game, you could always check out Ninja Gaiden on the Lynx. The other game I got here, this was this might have been actually the only game, now that I think about it. When I found that Lynx at a yard sale a few years ago, right down the street here, actually, it had NFL football in the system. And that's why I bought the system, because I didn't have NFL football. This is actually not a bad game. It's not great, but like I talked about NFL football on the Game Boy a few episodes ago and how much I hated it and how disappointed I was. This is a much better handheld football game than that. And what's cool about this game, I think this is the only game that I have that does this. When you play NFL football, you rotate the system and you play it in like portrait mode instead of landscape mode. So that's pretty neat. And I think you can play it either way because you can flip the screen, right? So if you want the D-pad down low and the buttons up high, you can do that, or you can flip it over, and either way works. But it's cool because if you think about it, you have a game like 10-Yard Fight in the arcade. That was a vertically oriented game, and it just makes more sense for a football game to be oriented vertically if you're going to have the field rotated that way. The only other game off the top of my head that I can think of that unfortunately I don't have that you had to play it that way on the Lynx was Gauntlet. And I don't have a Gauntlet for the Lynx, but it would be cool if I did. So when I was talking about Steel Talons, I was talking about how it showed off the graphical prowess of the Lynx, and the other game that does that excellently is Warbirds. And so back when I first started getting into PC gaming, my friend Stuart had a computer and he had a color monitor. And for reasons that we'll get into when we start talking about computers, he had a lot of Sierra games. And one of those games that he had was the Red Baron. And the Red Baron is sort of a, combat flight simulator, but it's like a World War I combat flight simulator. So you're flying like biplanes. And Warbirds is basically a handheld version of the Red Baron. And what's nutty about that is that this would have been like 1990 or so, or early 91, when I was playing the Red Baron at Stuart's house and thinking like, wow, this game is so cool. And little did I know that Warbirds came out for the Lynx in 1991. So I could have been playing a similar game on a handheld. How cool would that have been? But in Warbird, I mean, you're dogfighting with other planes, and it's in 3D. Like you're like, you have the view of the pilot, and you're flying your plane, and you're banking around and trying to shoot the other guy. And I mean, for this to be on a handheld, like you weren't getting Warbirds on the Game Boy. And again, that was because the fact that it had sprite scaling allowed for you to have those kind of 3D worlds. So now we're down to the last row of games. So this is the last 4 games I have for the Lynx. And this is not in any particular order. But, this gives me a chance to kind of talk about this. So actually, I'll save those for last. So the next one, I'm going to admit I have not played this game that much. I really don't know that much about it. I bought this game at the same time as I bought this case, because this was a game you could still get brand new from Best Electronics. Bithead is always talking about how much he loves this game, and that is Todd's Adventure in Slime World. And so I didn't know anything about this game when he started talking about it, but when I saw that I could still buy it from Best, when I ordered this, I grabbed it. And I don't even want to try to describe it because I won't do a good job. I don't know how you even find the video where Bithead talks about it, but he would do a better job of talking about it. So that's how I got Todd's Adventures in Slime World. The next game here is Super Squeak. I don't remember where I got Super Squeak. The best way to describe, I hate to describe one esoteric game by comparing it to another, but if you've ever played Zoom on the Genesis, or if you've just watched my Genesis in 1989 video from like however many years ago, we played Zoom. I showed Zoom in that episode. And Super Squeak kind of works the same way. Like there's this big grid and all the tiles are colored, I think, blue. And you have to walk around the grid, and each tile you step on, it turns it pink. But there's like enemies you have to kill, and there's different, like you have like a little shooter. I don't know exactly what it is, but you're shooting little pellets like straight ahead. But then you can pick up power-ups that will have you shooting pellets diagonally, and but it's a pretty cool game, I think. And I'm probably not explaining it very well, but it's a cool game that is well suited to a handheld. And so I guess what I wanted to show, so there were 3 different form factors to these cartridges. When they first came out, they looked, I'm going to show the side view of all of them because that's the way it makes the most sense. They looked like this. See, it's literally just a card. So like a hue card. It's about the same thickness as a hue card, but it doesn't have any kind of lip on it or anything. It has these bumps. Like you see, it's got a raised Atari logo. Well, that's upside down, but it's got a raised Atari logo, and it's got like these bumps, I guess, so that you could pull the system out, or pull the game rather out of the system. But that didn't really work that well. It's hard to get it out. And so they changed the design a little bit, and they added these little tabs to the back. So now you've got these two tabs to hook your fingers on and pull it out. And that's okay, I guess, but it's still kind of not great. So then they changed it one last time to the final form, which is they made the cartridges look like this. So now they have this little curved edge on top. And so now you can just grab the cartridge and pull it out. So when you put the cartridge in, the label ends up being up against the back of the system, which seems kind of backwards. Like they should have put the label on the other side, but whatever. Because plus they'd have more room for the label on the back because there's no contacts on the back. There's only contacts on the front. But I mean, who really cares? But anyway, that's the three different form factors that the game cards had. So this next game is actually very similar in a lot of ways to Super Squeak, and that is Chip's Challenge. And you see your little character is this little guy who looks kind of like a computer nerd, I guess. And all the levels, you have to pick up these computer chips. They look like little, chips with legs on them and stuff. And you have to pick up all these chips, and once you get all of them, there's like a chip socket that you can step on to end the level. But there's all these doors that are different colors, and you have to pick up different colored keys to open the doors. And there's little like puzzles, like you have to push things into the water and step on them to make them turn into concrete or whatever. And there's bad guys running around you have to avoid. So maybe, I don't know, it's kind of like Boxel in some ways, and it's kind of like Crystal Mines 2 in some ways, and it's kind of like Super Squeak in some ways. But it's a really cool game. Like I bought it again because I think it was cheap. I think this was another time that maybe I placed an order with Best Electronics for something else, and I just picked up a handful of cheap Lynx cartridges. I don't know how it is anymore, but for the longest time, you could still also find Lynx games like brand new on eBay for like really cheap. Stuff like Chip's Challenge or Food Fight or I can't remember what else. But although I think this last game actually might be an example of that. So this wasn't saved for last for any particular reason or anything. It's just the last one that I have here. But that is Gates of Zendikon. And Gates of Zendikon is a horizontally scrolling shooter. It's really not that great of a game, but it has really cool sound effects and it has great music. And it's not that bad of a game. It's just the levels are pretty boring. And I don't know, you could play it or watch a gameplay video. It's just like the actual gameplay is just kind of like, it's not that great. Like there's all these like balls flying towards you in these like sinusoidal patterns and you just shoot them. And I don't know, the levels are super short. One of the kind of cool things, so in between levels, you can kind of fly back to your space station and you can land your ship. And if you successfully land your ship, your little pilot comes out of the ship and he must be like 5 pixels tall. And you see him like walk across and he goes down this elevator and then goes into a new ship and takes off. And so I guess if your ship had any damage, now you get a new ship. But it even says at the end of the first level, like, oh, try to repair your ship, like, if you dare. And the reason it says that is that if you don't land just right, you crash and blow up your ship, and then you lose a life. But then, like, somehow you bailed out at the last minute. So even though you crashed the ship, you're fine, and then you still take the little elevator down and you get in a new ship. But like I said, gameplay-wise, I don't think it's that great of a game, but it's worth checking out just because probably of all of these games, Gates of Zendikon has the coolest music. So that's it, man. That's the Atari Lynx. Like I said, that was kind of out of order, but this just seemed like, since I'd already been talking about Radio Shack, I just figured, talking about the Lynx doesn't really need to be in any particular order, right? So yeah. So hopefully that was enjoyable. And to be honest, probably the next episode of Flashback is going to be the Christmas episode in 3 weeks. I don't really see myself having time to put out another one between now and then. I just uploaded a new magazine read through on the other channel yesterday, And I want to actually make 2 or 3 more of those between now and the end of the year, just because I'm going to have some more time to work on that stuff. I have Christmas break coming up. And just honestly, in general, I want to make more magazine read-throughs. For the longest time, I've had this idea in my head that there has to be some ratio of like launch caliber videos to magazine read-throughs, because like I don't want people unsubscribing from my channel. And I'm just going to be super honest and say I'm just at a point where I just don't really care anymore. Like I started doing YouTube because I wanted to make the kind of content I wanted to make. And then the channel started growing and I started feeling more like this pressure to be what the subscribers wanted me to be. And now I'm just kind of swinging back the other way. And I'm just going to I'm going to make the kind of content that I want to make. And if people don't want to watch it, like, you know, if they want to unsubscribe, like, that's totally cool. So expect to probably see a greater frequency of magazine read-through uploads on the other channel. Although I am absolutely still going to make launch videos. I'm not saying I'm going to stop. I'm just saying sometimes I feel like, oh, I want to make another magazine read-through, but like the last 2 uploads were magazine read-throughs. I need to make another launch episode. And I just overthink everything, and I'm just kind of done with that. So that's what I'll be doing on that channel coming up. Here on this channel, as I said, the next flashback will probably be up the weekend before Christmas. And but as most of you, if you're watching this, I'm sure you already know, we're doing weekly live streams. This coming Tuesday, Corey from My Life in Gaming will be joining me on the live stream, and we're going to be checking out the PlayStation Classic console that should hopefully be at my house by then. I pre-ordered it on Amazon. Everybody's canceling their pre-orders. The system probably sucks. We can talk about how much it sucks and check it out. And then after the live stream, I can box it up and send it back if it's really that bad. So it's no big deal. And then I think the week after that is Atari 2600 with Aaron from Friday Night Arcade. And then the week after that is Sega Saturn with Alex Mort from Retro Game Squad. And then the week after that, which will not be on a Tuesday because it's Christmas, I'm going to do like a special Christmas live stream. And that'll just be me by myself unless things change. And then after that, like I know, I have the Switch now. So I want to do a Switch live stream at some point. Somebody just requested that I do a PlayStation 2 live stream, which I would love to do. I can't remember the last time I turned on my PlayStation 2, but I love that system. I bought that system on launch day, and I had so much fun with it. And for whatever reason, now I just hardly ever play my PlayStation 2. So I would love to have an excuse to hook that up again. So anyway, that's what's going on in the world of Classic Gaming Quarterly in the near future. That's going to do it for this episode, however. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again soon.